Today's lesson is on adding and subtracting whole numbers and decimal numbers. So before we start, we're going to go through some rules, and for each rule I'm going to give you an example. So the first one is when adding whole numbers, line up the numbers according to their place value. So let's see what that means. So let's say I have a question that looks like this. So those are my numbers, and again, this is written horizontally. So when things are written horizontally, it's hard to add up, right? It's really difficult to understand these numbers when they're written horizontally. So what we're going to do is we're going to change them from horizontal to a vertical format just to make it easier. So when you're changing to vertical, this is where that rule is applied to line them up according to their place value. So when you're lining up these numbers, we're going to make sure that all the ones line up together. So if that's my first number, 235, I wrote that down. Then my next number has how many digits? It has 3 digits, 4, 1, and 2. So I start with my 2, my 1, and my 4. And that makes sure that my 412 is lined up with my 235. And then I have 13. So I write down my 1s and I write down my 10s. And I know that I'm adding. So then when we're adding, all we do is we go ahead and we start at the top and we go down the ones column first, then the tens, then the hundreds. You always start from the from the right hand side, and then you work your way down. And when we're adding, we don't have to worry about borrowing. We just go ahead and we add. Now let's go ahead. Now that I'm just going to change my color here. So I go 5 plus 2 is 7. Plus 3 is 10. So what I do is put my 1s down and I carry my 10s on to the next one. Okay? Then I go ahead and I count, so I add up again, and this time I have to remember to add that extra number that's up there along with the rest of the numbers in that tens column. So I go ahead and I add, so I go 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. And it's only 1's digit, so it goes there, and then I go ahead to my hundreds digit. And just because there is no number here, that means it's a 0, so we don't count anything in that value, in that place value space. So then I go, what's 2 plus 4 is 6, so my total is 660. So again, the first rule to remember when you're adding, and so if your numbers are written horizontally like that, you want to put it vertically. You want to make sure that your values, place values all line up, and then you're able to add. Okay. Rule number 2, when subtracting, you have to remember to always put the largest number on top and then make sure that your place values line up. So again, let's just come up with some numbers here. 421 minus 3, let's just change that. Hang on, I'm going to just increase that. Minus 621. And so, when you have something like this, again, it's in a linear pattern, what you're going to do is you are going to first put it, so you're moving it from being horizontal to moving it vertical. And when you're moving it vertical, what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the larger number from the smaller number so that we're able to get a positive answer. Later on, we'll talk about negatives and integers, but right now we are just looking to subtract. So we put, oops, I don't know what happened there. We have 642, that's our larger number, and then we are going to subtract. And again, start from your place value of 1. You want to make sure your numbers are lined up, and you put your smaller number underneath. And then we go ahead and we subtract. And so 2 subtract 1 is 1. 4 subtract 2 is 2. 6 subtract 4 is 2. So there we go. We're just going to do one more, but I'm going to change the numbers a little this time. So let's say my numbers are... Okay, so I changed the numbers a little. This time, what I did was, again, I did give it to you in a linear pattern, so horizontally again. We are going to shift it vertically, but in order to do that, I need to just clear some space here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that space so that I can work. I'm going to put my larger number on top. So my larger number is 621, and my smaller number is 595. And again, I am lining up my place values. So my ones are all together, my twos, my tens are together, and then my hundreds are together. So they're lined up. Now, the reason I did this question is just to show you if you are borrowing. So I know that if I wanted to subtract 1 from 5, I can't do that, right? So let's say, and think about it this way. I have 1 candy. I have 1 candy, but I want to subtract 5 candies from this 1 candy. It's not possible, right? So it's not possible to subtract 1 from 5. The only way that would be possible is if I go to my neighbor, and so in this case, my neighbor is this 2. So I'm going to go to my neighbor and I'm going to say, hey neighbor, is there any way that I can borrow 1? The neighbor says yes. So the neighbor gives its neighbor 1 and it turns into a 1. So now this turns into an 11. It's not 2, it's 11. So now 11 subtract 5 is going to give you a 6. So I was able to do that because I borrowed. Now again, we go to the tens, and if you see the tens, I have 1 minus 9. And again, if I had 1 candy and I had 9, I wouldn't be able to do that. So what I need to do is that 1 is going to go down to its neighbor and say, hey neighbor, is there any way that I can borrow 1? And the neighbor says, absolutely. So he gives 1 up. So he turns into a 5, and now this number turns into an 11. And again, 11 subtract 9 would be 2. And then 5 subtract 5 is 0. So my number, when you subtract these two, would be 26. So again, you line up your place values and then subtract, and make sure that if you don't have enough, you are borrowing. Okay, now moving on to the next rule. When adding or subtracting decimal numbers, always line up your decimals. So you need to make sure that your decimals are lined up. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a question here. So let's say I have 22.2 and I'm going to add 32.301. And so in order to do this, again, I gave it to you in the horizontal way. So in order to do this, you're going to turn it vertical. When we're adding, we don't have to worry about the larger number being on top. We just go ahead and we line up our decimals. That's the important part. So here, my decimal for the other numbers there, I know that there are 3 digits here. So I'm going to put down all 3 digits. And then I'm going to put down my front 2 digits. So my ones and my tens. And then these are my tenths, my hundredths, my thousandths, right? So I've lined them up. There is no value here. It's a 0. So even if we're adding, then once our decimal's lined up, you move that decimal down first, just so that you don't leave it behind. 0 plus 1 is 0, 2 plus 0 is 2, 2 plus 3 is 5, 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 plus 3 is 5. And so there is my number, and I didn't forget that decimal because I moved it down right away. You want to make sure you do that so that you don't leave it behind. The same rule again applies for subtraction. So let's say we took this question and we changed it to a subtraction question. So I'm just going to get a marker again. I changed it to a subtraction question. This time we're going to put the larger number on top, because remember with subtraction you put the larger number on top. But I am going to make sure that my decimal still lines up. And then in this case, I'm going to start subtracting. 1 subtract nothing would be 1, because there's no number there, it's a 0. 0 cannot, if I have nothing left, if I have nothing at all, I cannot subtract 2. So he has to go to his neighbor, goes, neighbor, can I borrow 1? Neighbor turns into a 2. This number turns into a 10. 10 subtract 2 is going to give me 8. 2 subtract 2 is 0. And again, I move my decimal down in the right spot. And then 2 subtract 2 is 0. 3 subtract 2 is 1. And again, as long as my decimal follows all the way down, I'm going to be okay. Okay? So, another rule, but this is not really a rule, this is just something to know. Addition is the inverse operation of subtraction. An inverse operation simply means the opposite operation. So if we have, and this is just a simple question, 55 plus 23, what does it equal? So again, let's put it horizontal. From horizontal, let's move it vertically. And I go ahead and I do that. 5 plus 3 is 8. 5 plus 2 is 7. So now, what I mean by an inverse operation is that if I do 78 subtract 23, the answer I'm going to get is 55 each time because it is the inverse operation. It's the opposite. So what's going to happen? Let's do this. So 8 subtract 3 is 5. 7 subtract 2 is 5. Look at that. Now if I do 78 subtract 55, I'm going to get, this time, I'm going to get my 23. So let's check it out, see if it works. So I do 8 subtract 5, which is 3. 7 subtract 5, which is 2. There you go. So that's why it's an inverse operation, is that if you're missing one, you can figure it out by simply flipping it because it is an opposite operation. Moving on. So this is your task number 1. This is the one that you're going to try. So I want you to read the question. I want you to try it, and then I want you to pause your video and try it out and then come back. So go ahead and pause your video. Okay, welcome back. So Savni loves to read. In August, she reads a book with 436 pages. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight that number because it's important to me. In September, she reads a book with 235 pages. And during the month of October, she is reading a book or plans to complete to read a book with 564 pages. By the end of October, how many pages will she have read? So I know because they're asking me how many in total. Because of that, I know I'm going to be doing addition. Okay, that gives me my clue that I'm adding. With addition, remember the rule is just line up the numbers, make sure they're lined up with place value. So it doesn't matter which number I put on top. I just go ahead and I'm going to line them up. And then I'm going to start adding. And so all you're doing is you're adding up your numbers. So I go 6 plus 5 plus 4 is 15. Put down my 5, carry my 1. Sorry, I forgot my addition sign, guys. Remember, it's 15, so I put down my 1s. I carry my 10s. 6 plus 3 is 12. Plus 1 is 13. Again, I put down my 1s. I carry my 10s. 4 plus 2 is 6. Plus 5 plus 1. Sorry, 5 plus 6 plus 1 is 12. So my answer is going to be 1,235, and you're going to put that in a word statement. So she will read 1,235 pages total. Okay? So make sure you got that right. Oops. T-O-T-A-L. That's a mistake. Let's erase that. Okay. Moving on, here's your next one that you're going to try. So Springbrook recycles 5,687 cans in September, 7,539 cans in October. How many more cans did they recycle in October than in September? So go ahead, pause the video, try it out, and then come back. Okay, welcome back. So as we're reading the question again, I highlighted my important information, which were my numbers. And in this case, they're asking me how many more. So they're asking me how many more in one month than the other. So I know that in this case, I'm going to do subtraction. And remember, the rule for subtraction is to have the bigger number on top. So I look at my numbers. This is 5,000. This is 7,000. I'm going to put 7,000 on top. I'm going to line up my place values to make sure that they are all lined up. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract. So 9 subtracts 7. I go ahead and I do that, and it's 2. And I can't subtract 3 from 8, so I go over to my friend. I borrow. I turn him into a 4. That turns into a 13. 13 subtract 8 is 5. I put that down. Again, 4 can't subtract 6, so I go ahead and I borrow. That turns into a 6. That turns into, oops, sorry, a 14. 14 subtract 6 is 8, and then 6 subtract 5 is 1. So then I can say that in September, in October, they recycled 1,852 more cans. Gentlemen, and as always, I'm going to leave this one with you. This is about Soham and his family going shopping and has to do with money, which is something that you guys can actually think about. So money is something we spend all the time. I want you to figure out the answer to this question and bring it to class on Monday. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen.